Now, two of South Africa's labour union federations, COSATU and SAFTU, are planning a national strike next week. That will be on Wednesday, the 24th. Now, the mass action is to protest against the rising cost of fuel and food prices, and also the continuing power cuts, among other matters. COSATU says that the strike is also a socio-economic pushback against the ongoing warfare directed at working class by both the public and the private sector. Meanwhile, after months of crippling price increases on fuel, mid-month data from the Central Energy Fund shows that fuel prices could fall by as much as R2.60 in September. But of course, the department cautions that that outlook can change before the end of the month. We're joined now by COSATU's national spokesperson, Sizwe Pamla, for a conversation on these developments. Mr. Pamla, thanks so much for your time. Welcome to Morning Live.
Morning to you and the viewers.
So perhaps I should allow you an opportunity to first just expand for us this call for a national strike and what it will entail.
Well, we are calling on all workers in South Africa, but also South Africans in general, to join us on the 24th of August next week. We have a national strike. If you have noticed over the last couple of weeks, we've been having protests all around provinces, raising the issue of the cost of living. But next week, then we will have activities in all 9 provinces. It's a legally protected strike. We have received a certificate, such as 27 notice from Network. This strike really is about focusing the energies of South Africans and workers in general to the relevant people who happens to be policymakers and decision makers. Many of the problems that we are currently dealing with are not new. We have discussed them before. In some instances, we have actually found common positions. Just look at the issue of fuel, for an example, fuel increases. 4 years ago, COSATU raised the issue of a possibility of a fuel price cap. We met the then Minister of Energy, Jeff Hadebe, promised us a research, said, look, we're going to research this and we will present a report. 4 years later, we haven't received such a report. So we're going there to demand the release of that report so that we can start implementing the fuel price cap. But also 4 years ago, there were 2 bills in Parliament. It was the Road Accident Fund Bill and the Road Accident Fund Benefit Scheme Bill. They were presented in Parliament to help put a road accident fund on a sustainable path. This is very important when it comes to fuel because a chunk of the fuel levy goes into servicing the road accident fund debt that is currently sitting at more than 300 billion. If we don't resolve that problem, it will continue to have this problem of exorbitant price increases. So we want those bills to be tabled back because they were withdrawn. We want them to be retabled so that we can resolve the issue of the road accident fund. With regards to load shedding, you'll remember 2 years ago, COSATU came with something that was called the Eskom Social Compact. Tabled at Network, we discussed it with all social partners, it was endorsed, it was signed 2 years ago. 2 years later, there's very little by way of implementation. And that is very disappointing when you consider the implications of load shedding to the economy, to workers, and to communities in general. So we'll also be demanding the implementation of the Eskom Social Compact. But also, if you remember, between 2020 and 2021, when we were under lockdown, there were allegations of price gouging directed at the pharmaceutical sector and the retail sector. We continue to believe that government has not done enough to really investigate those allegations. We believe that many of these retailers are abusing inflation by increasing prices exorbitantly. So we will be demanding the investigation of price gouging allegations facing the pharmaceutical sector. But also we will just be reminding South Africans that the problem is not with other foreigners and other South Africans, but it is with policymakers and decision makers so that we can all focus on the real target, because we are starting to see this frustration in our communities with high unemployment, with escalating poverty, that people are starting to fight amongst themselves instead of casting their energies on the culprits, weapons, the decision makers.
So, Mr. Pamla, you say the problem actually lies with the policy and decision makers. I would imagine you are referring here to the governing party, the ANC, of which, of course, COSATU is in an alliance with. And many have asked the questions in many guises over many years about the relevance of the alliance, because when you say that's where the problem lies, COSATU is a part of that decision-making when it comes down to it. So essentially, you should be taking part of the blame then, shouldn't you?
Not necessarily, no. For example, if you look at the things that I've raised, the Alliance has endorsed the ESCOM Social Compact. It has endorsed the Economic Recovery and Reconstruction Plan that was signed at NEDLAC. It has endorsed the outcomes of the investment summit. It has endorsed the outcomes of the job summit. So what we are talking about here is a situation where we have solutions. We have discussed and found solutions. And in fact, we have lobbied other social partners to endorse those solutions. Now, the challenge that we have is that at a government level, either there is a lack of political will or there's a lack of capacity when it comes to implementing the decision. That is really where the problem lies. In fact, we came out of that policy conference raising that very same issue to say we still remain unconvinced that the ANC has come out with some sustainable systems and mechanisms to ensure that government implements these policies. So it's not a question of we are disagreeing at a policy level or we're disagreeing on possible solutions. We actually have solutions that have got the support of everyone. The problem is they are not being implemented. So that is why we're saying, let's go then and try to exert more pressure on the administration, but also on the private sector, because we do believe that there is actually an investment strike when it comes to the private sector. If you look at the fact that 10 years ago, corporate tax was 30%. 10 years later, it is sitting at 27%. The question is, where are they investing this money that has been given to them? We know, according to the State Security Agency, that 80 billion of that money is taken out every year. So that is a problem that we are also facing, is that we have an administration that keeps sending over these incentives to the private sector, with the private sector that's taking money out of the country. Yes, we do have a problem as an alliance, which is really to make sure that the ANC government implements the decision. But at an alliance level, we are in agreement, we have discussed the solutions, and we are all just expecting the government to implement.
So, and you see, this is part of the issue, because as the alliance and as an alliance member, I was reading last night Zingiswa Losi address to the ANC NEC Lekgotla in January as an example, and in it, she was actually very scathing. She was talking about not a week passing without seeing comrades, including those in cabinet and the NEC, gracing the front pages of newspapers, scandal after scandal. She was also saying that COSATU is equally angered at some of the developments. She says we must raise our anger and condemn the failure of our alliance partner to pay its own employees. Speaking to the issue that you also raised about the socioeconomic pushback against ongoing warfare against working class by the public and private sector. So in raising all of this, again, one has to ask, COSATU keeps raising this, but you're raising this as part of the alliance. So at what point does the public take COSATU seriously in saying that you guys are really pushing for the changes and the changes that you have mentioned in the interest of not only your members, but workers in general?
Well, firstly, I'm glad you have actually quoted that, because it is a reminder that as an alliance partner, we do everything to support the African National Congress, but also we do everything to hold it accountable, the African National Congress. And in 2024, the ANC is likely to face one of its most difficult elections after 1994. 20 years ago, the ANC had a third majority. 20 years later, the ANC is not even sure if it can pull off 50+1 to get the mandate to govern. We are all aware of the the consequences of the ANC's failure in government. So as an alliance partner, of course, we need to be realistic when it comes to such issues. Firstly, the ANC is really failing if you look at where we are with the issues of unemployment. We are the most unequal country in the world when it comes to solving those problems of the economic front. But also on the policy front, the ANC has also done some commendable things. As workers, we have a national minimum wage, something that we had been fighting for the last 25 years. The ANC was able to deliver. So while we hold the ANC accountable when it comes to its failures, we also cannot dismiss some of the successes that the ANC has been able to achieve and implement in this country. So you can look at issues of education, you can look at the progress that the ANC has made when it comes to the national health insurance on the legislative front. We are working with the ANC right now to ensure that workers play a role when it comes to management of their retirement savings. There's been stiff resistance when it comes to the private sector because they believe they are the ones who know better, who needs to control this money. But as I'm talking to you now, we have a pension withdrawal scheme that is in place. We are having discussions about how to manage that, how to make sure that it is fair to workers, but also we are not reckless in terms of managing workers' retirement savings. So there is a lot of work that we are doing with the ANC that is beneficial to workers. At the same time, we are not mincing our words when it comes to spectacular failures, when it comes to mismanagement of the economy. Yes, this is the price you pay being in an alliance. You have to make sure that you remind people of the good things, but at the same time, you don't shy away from confronting your partners, but also acknowledging when they are failures.
We are just about out of time, but I just have to ask you about privatization. Trade unions, yourselves included, saying that you're opposed to privatization of government entities. So what's your take on the Takatso deal with SAA and also the prospects of a full acquisition of Telkom by MTN?
Well, that Takatso deal is a real crisis. Firstly, we rejected it when it was first announced. We had come out before to say what we would have preferred is for the ANC government to actually look for a public-public partnership, meaning that you do have airlines that are run by other governments around the world. We would have preferred that the ANC look for partners outside of South Africa where we can either look in the Middle East or Ethiopian Airlines, but other airlines that are run by government so that we can have public partnerships. We don't think that is going to work. It has not worked. If you look at the aviation industry in South Africa, it is actually paying a price because the privatization of Sasol, for example, meant that South Africa impairs 90% of its own fuel. So South African Airways is not going to be competitive, especially when it comes to international routes, competing with the Gulf Airlines that are beneficiaries of petrodollars. So there are big problems when it comes to fixed SAA, which is why we felt that we needed outside partners, people who can bring much more than just money, but who can bring speed. So we continue to believe that it was a mistake to privatize South African Airways. The issue of Telkom and MTN is just scandalous. It's something that we reject. This is the kind of privatization that has led to South Africa becoming the most unequal country in the world. We're taking something that is in the hands of the state. Because if you look at the PIC share, Telkom, and the government share, then Telkom is actually a state-owned entity. We're handing over a state-owned entity to the private sector. And what we know of the private sector is that the first thing they are going to do is to outsource some of the services outside, because they are MTN is no longer a South African company. It's a multinational. So it is going to move operations outside of the country. Telkom itself, if you look at the IT technicians and engineers at Telkom, they were dismissed because some of the services were outsourced to a Chinese company, Huawei. So jobs are going to get lost. But the problem of cartels in South Africa is not going to be fixed by this measure. It's going to be made worse. So what we want is more competition. We want more players to be allowed to come and participate in the telecommunications sector. And if you continue to create monopolies, they distort the market, but they also just shed jobs because they move services around the world. And as a result, they actually retrench not just people at a lower level, but they retain some of the most experienced and qualified professionals.
Mr. Pamla, thanks so much for your time. And of course, I'm sure we will speak again towards the 24th when that strike action is planned for. Talking there about a planned national strike to take place on Wednesday next week to protest against the rising cost of fuel and food prices and other matters concerning workers. COSATU will tomorrow hold a media briefing to share more details on their plans